Welcome back to Silver Goose Farm Stories. I'm Maria Silva, aka Mama Goose, and today I'll be attempting a solo episode without my co-host Jamie Silva. Apologies in advance if it's a bumpy ride, and also if the audio is a little bit weird. I'm recording at night and trying not to wake anyone up, so it might be a weird ASMR type experience at some points. But anyway, let's begin. I wanted to give an update about what's been going on with Cookie, our milk cow. If you remember back to a previous episode, we announced that she was pregnant, which is wonderful news to everyone here on the farm. But there were other events that led up to that news, so I just wanted to cover that today. Cookie was artificially inseminated using the same bull straws from her first pregnancy, donated by the Jersey bull from Holtz Creek Farms named Alvin. The process for a cow versus a heifer, meaning a cow who is having its first pregnancy, so it doesn't involve a giant hormone-releasing insert, which is great. But instead of a 10-day schedule of shots to get her on cycle and ready, it takes about 5 shots over the course of 5 weeks to regulate ovulation and also sort of work with the hormones that are involved in lactation because, we're still milking her concurrently. So for anyone interested, it's about 5 milliliters of bovine lutulase and gonadotropin releasing hormone, if you're a nerd like me and appreciate that kind of information. Same as last time, I was the one administering the shots because my husband doesn't like needles, and it was fairly routine at this point, which is great. It was less anxiety inducing for me to give such a large animal shots because we were very comfortable with doing that at this point. But unlike the last time, Cookie was not okay with being poked. I don't blame her for that reaction because who does? But for several of the scheduled shots, she was really reluctant to get into the stanchion. And if I only showed up in the mornings to do, even if it was just to milk, she associated me with something uncomfortable and just would not get into the stanchion unless I bribed her with some grain or some other sort of treats. In fact, the last injection we gave her before the insemination appointment, she wouldn't even get into her stanchion and just completely avoided me altogether. I had to go and give her the shot in the field, which was a little scary for me because she wouldn't stand still, and I was afraid I would snap the needle if she moved suddenly away from me. So thankfully my husband was also there and provided a long enough distraction so that we could get that job done. It's actually not a scary process and pretty simple. So if you are needing to give your cow a shot, I have a super quick little tutorial on our Instagram. Actually, it's just the handle Silver Goose Family Farm. I didn't know it was going to be a public thing. I was just teaching a friend of mine, but there it is for anyone else who wants to use. Anyway, we got the last shot done, and then the insemination happened without much incident, thankfully. And also, I was given a little vial and a needle so that in about 30 days from that insemination date, I could do a blood draw so that we could get a pregnancy confirmation. You do want to do this unless you have a bull and they're covering the cows on a regular basis, because you don't want to wait 9 months and then find out that your cow actually wasn't pregnant. And then you have to do the whole process over again. Before we did the blood draw, though, Cookie ended up getting sick. I started off one morning, Cookie gave us 2 gallons of milk. It was amazing. Normally, it was like a gallon, maybe a gallon and a half. But some days when she's feeling very generous, we got 2. And that particular day we did. And I had gone to a friend's house and we'd done cheese making, and I was reading up on all these beautiful dairy processing experiments, and I'm super excited, and I literally had a dream about making cultured buttermilk and all the very cool things you can do with it. So the next day I was super excited. If I got 2 gallons of milk every single morning, I could do so much. I could process so much milk, so much cheese, so much yogurt, etc. So I got super excited, went to the stanchion, got ready to milk her, and then there was nothing. We barely got a quart of milk. She looked fine. She looked a little bit perturbed as to why I was upset with her. But we thought, perhaps the hormone shots were messing up her lactation cycle, and Or perhaps it's the fact that we live in California in the high desert and it's drought season coming into summer and there isn't any pasture. So maybe she just doesn't have enough vegetation and protein in her diet, and that's why her milk supply drops, because it does happen that way. So we upped her hay, particularly the alfalfa, which is a high protein hay for cows, and waited till the next morning. Next day came around, again, no milk. Her udder was completely slack, as if think of a deflated soccer ball or something. We gave her more hay, and we gave her grain for the first time in a year, hoping that the extra protein would jumpstart her milk production again. And she seemed really happy with the grain, but didn't touch her hay because she had her candy first. But the next day, again, still no milk. And then that day, she only took a little bit of sip of water and turned down eating grain too. So a full 24 hours, no longer eating hay, and now no longer eating grain. We did a quick overview of her condition. Her udder was slack. There weren't any hot spots or hard spots, so no kind of fever showing, and still no milk at any of the quarters. What did end up coming out at this point was no longer milk, but this really kind of nasty, yellow, snotty cottage cheese type thing. But it was so small in volume. So from all the teats combined, we couldn't even get enough of a sample to take to our vet to run a bacterial culture to see what was causing the problem. More concerning to us, though, besides the milk, was the fact that Cookie wasn't even eating. She loves her meals. And the only other time she had ever turned down food since we've had her was when she went into labor. And even immediately after that, she started eating again. So something was very wrong. We live in a very rural area with lots of farms, both on the small scale like ours, or big, huge commercial operations. Think the Cuties mandarin orchards are right down the street from us, as well as some other really big name produce companies and their orchards. We also live close by to a few large commercial dairies like the Land O'Lakes dairy and other really large cattle operations. And so in addition to those, plus, all of our small farm type animals and, the other big animal operations like pigs and goats and sheep and all that stuff, the large animal vets in the area are stretched very thin always, but they care a lot. And so even though I couldn't get my vet to come out and see Cookie, she was on the phone with me over the course of the few days that we were dealing with this sickness. So we talked to her vet. Her name is Dr. Becky, and she made multiple calls with me throughout the several days, trying to figure out what was going on. She walked me through palpating Cookie's abdomen and listening to her digestive tracts. I sent reports on the visual state of Cookie's rumen, and that is the first stomach of a cow, where they take those bites of grass and they break down the cellulose, which normally most animals can't digest, by breaking it down with the bacteria that live in there. And you look for that first because a large distended rumen means that there's some issue going on with the bacteria that live in her stomach, and that will cause bloat, gas that can't escape. And a bad case of bloat can kill a cow in 24 hours. Imagine a balloon that is overfilled and then pop. Just kind of gruesome. But thankfully, we were having no rumen problems. She was drinking water, but not with that really satisfying Hoover suctioning kind of action that she normally does, but sort of just licking it to make the effort of hydrating herself. And also we discovered that she was severely constipated. We did multiple temperature checks throughout the day, and if you ever want to do that, all you gotta do is take a little digital thermometer and put it in your cow's anus, and then just let the thermometer do its thing. And a cow's basal body temperature is around the same as humans, around 98 to maybe 101 for a normal body temperature. So after we were doing all these checks, looking at all the symptoms that she was having, our vet suspected what she thought to be an obstruction. And that seems like a really vague term for whatever it was that she had, but apparently it's a big deal for cows. They have 4 stomachs, so any sort of obstruction in their digestive system can cause a lot of problems, and it could be anywhere along that digestive tract. We just didn't know. But part of the symptoms for some sort of abdominal or digestive obstruction is anorexia and also lack of lactation. There are a couple other symptoms which escape me at the moment. But, those are the 2 big ones that stood out to me because I was thinking, yes, those are exactly the things that we see. And our vet, who couldn't come to see us because she was working with the commercial dairies all that time period, really encouraged that I call all the available large animal vets in the area to come out and see her immediately because she couldn't. And it was really a priority to make the correct diagnosis and to decide what sort of treatment we would need to do going forward. But I called several places and all the vets were also booked up. They're all working with large dairies and they had no appointments available to come see our cow. All these thoughts started going through my head. If it was a bad obstruction, the only way to fix it would be surgery, which would mean many, many thousands of dollars that we didn't have. And then I was thinking in my head, like, oh no, what if our cow dies? And just thinking from a financial point, we had invested so much money in her, in the infrastructure, in the equipment for dairy, in just her, insemination and food, and not to mention kind of like what position a family cow has on a farm. Your day-to-day life kind of circles around them when they're in milk. You start your day with them, you end your day with them. You go out and you are actually like physically touching each other for several minutes throughout the day. I rest my head on her side and on her hip, and I feel like the food that she eats kind of rumble around, and I know what she smells like. Cookie smells like toasted grass. It's really lovely. And, she knows my voice. She comes to me. She knows all of our children. Like, I'm not the kind of person that has pets or calls them fur babies or anything like that. I'm sort of very professional and matter of fact about all the animals on our farm and the purposes they hold. But that doesn't mean I'm heartless. and Cookie is you spend a lot of time with them. They're important. And so just the idea of, oh my gosh, what if she dies, was very anxiety inducing. Not to mention, like, logistically, like, what would you do? Like, it's the middle of summer. The ground is concrete. Could you butcher her? I don't know. Like, could we eat her? Like, emotionally, physically? I don't know. And then, to have to inform our really good friend who sold us Cookie in the first place, who loves her. Like, there were just so many what ifs and horror stories and hypotheticals that were circling around in my head. And whenever that happens, I call my dad. For anyone who doesn't know, my dad is a priest serving at the Orthodox monastery nearby where we live. And so I was at a loss. And when I am feeling kind of lost, I always ask for prayers. And so I asked my dad to come pray for Cookie. And for us too. So he and my mom came. They only live about a mile away. And they came right away. My husband and I and all our kids, we kind of tugged on our boots and we trekked out to the cow pen with my dad. And my husband and I got into the cow pen and we kind of called Cookie over. She was really kind of happy to see all of us. And she stood between Hank and me. And then my dad got in and all the girls sort of climbed up on the fence and were peering over, watching us. The funny thing is, when my dad came in, Cookie didn't come over and she can get kind of familiar. She likes to poke her nose and sniff you and whatever. But when my dad came in, she bowed her head down under his hand and licked the wooden cross he held over her as he prayed and stood very still, which is kind of unusual for her. She's always sort of tossing her head and flicking her ears and stuff like that. But she stood still, like she was listening, like she understood what was happening. Even Butters, who at the time had a really bad case of pink eye, which kind of went under the radar with us because we were more focused on Cookie and he kind of just had to deal with it until we were able to focus on him. Came over and was sort of snuffling at my dad's feet and was sort of bumping him with his back, like stood there and was listening. My dad sprinkled holy water across both of them and When the prayer was over, Cookie and Butters sort of walked off into the pasture like cows do. But afterwards, I felt a great deal of peace, and I knew that things would be better. The next morning, Cookie was on her feet. She ate from her hay, although not as enthusiastically as she normally does, but she definitely took some serious bites. And she took some really long licks from her mineral salt block and some long drinks of water. She also did a very long pee and strained a bit and passed a very firm cow pie. And all I could think was, glory to God. Is it weird to be so excited about watching my cow poop? I don't know. And also, I apologize. And the vet called again pretty soon after we did our morning observations of how she was behaving, and I relayed all that information to her, and I was super excited and happy. And but the vet was still very concerned, because even though some of these symptoms seem like they're improving, an obstruction can come back or even come back worse, like maybe something moved and got dislodged and then is stuck again. So she really wanted and insisted that I get another vet to come out and examine her, and I told her, well, no one's available, but I guess I'll keep trying. Also, I couldn't say my daddy came and prayed over her and I know she's going to be okay now without sounding like a crazy person. But also, I didn't think it was a bad idea to get a second opinion. So I called everyone again. I got the same, we're too busy and there isn't anyone available message, and I sort of left it at that. But then randomly, a vet called me back and said they'd finished their appointments with some extra time and they were going to swing by my place, that afternoon to see our cow, which was kind of a miracle in and of itself. So I was very thankful, and I said, yes, please. I'd really appreciate any help that you could give us. The visiting vet was wonderfully kind and thorough. He listened very patiently to Cookie as she chewed her cud in her stanchion, and my children chattered incessantly around him. And he sort of said, sounds good. Everything internally sounds normal. I'm going to arm her just in case. Arm her? My husband looked at me rather quizzically until he saw the vet approach Cookie with a very long obstetric glove on. And later on, Hank says, I learned a new verb today. He examined her manure. It was loose and no longer compacted. And then he kind of reached in further and he paused. And then he said, did you know she's pregnant? And then we all cheered and was super relieved and excited because 1, she seemed to be doing great, and 2, I didn't have to draw blood for a pregnancy test. But the vet ended up taking a milk sample from the nasty clotted milk and said that whatever was bothering her had apparently resolved itself because he couldn't see anything wrong, and she seemed completely ordinary in her digestive tract and her manure and, her heart and lungs and everything. So we were super happy and thankful for that information. He also said that because she wasn't a dairy cow in like a massive corporate dairy kind of operation, he thought that we might be able to get her back into milk, maybe not to the same levels as she was before getting sick, but definitely like a usable amount of milk. Also because the milk was pretty clotted and yellow still, that it was a good idea to milk her out anyway to make sure that there wasn't any bacteria buildup or inflammation that could cause any other problems. And so that was that. Within a few days, Cookie's appetite was back to normal. Her milk supply never really came back though. 3 of the 4 quarters, so an udder is kind of like one large bag, and it's divided into 4 quarters that are all separate from themselves. Each quarter ends in a teat. So think of like each quarter as a separate breast. So 3 of those 4 quarters returned to normal milk. Like it was white, it was creamy, it was just very small in volume, like maybe about a pint to a quart altogether. But 1 quarter was very obviously larger than the others and very firm to the touch. I wouldn't say the mastitis descriptions in books are like, it feels like a softball underneath the skin. And it didn't feel like that. It just felt like when she was in milk and she was full. But when we'd milk that quarter, nothing would come out, or it would just be like the nasty cottage cheesy kind of stuff. And then you'd have to rub super hard, massage really hard for like a minute, and then squeeze again, and you get 1 little bit of milk. It was very frustrating because we had to, milk her twice a day and get very little, if anything, and none of it was drinkable. Technically, we could have drunk from the other 3 quarters as long as you kept the mastitic milk separate from the regular stuff. But it was so little in quantity, it didn't seem worth it to have all those separate buckets. So we just put everything in the same container and gave it to the animals. But when a quarter is inflamed like that, you have to milk them out. You can't let it in there because the bacteria is going to fester and reproduce and make the infection worse. And so we milked and milked and milked every single day. It was like, imagine just pressing as hard as you could with your thumb and rubbing down and trying to make these motions to encourage whatever is at the top of your udder to slowly come down towards the teat end. And that would take a minute of very firm rubbing to get just like the littlest squirt of milk. And then you try again, and it took 45 minutes to an hour to get less than a quart of anything twice a day, and sometimes 3 times a day, because when you have mastitis, you need to empty the udder, you need to empty the quarter as often as possible to get all the bacteria out. The milkings got to be so bad for me that I got inflamed tendons in my thumbs from, massaging so firmly, and I had to take a break and let my husband take over. We treated initially with an all-purpose store-bought mastitis antibiotic, which made a little bit of improvement for one day, but then everything seemed to go back to normal the following. And you're not supposed to do back-to-back antibiotic treatments once you do one. So we couldn't just double dose on that and see if there was any sort of change. We got some milk cultures done first with that first visiting vet, and then about 2 weeks later I got some more down to Dr. Becky, but both sets of tests came back negative for any sort of bacterial strains, which was confusing and frustrating, but our vet encouraged us, told us we were doing the right thing, and that as long as we were emptying her out to the best of our abilities, that things would improve, just slowly. About 3 weeks into treating the mastitis, Cookie sort of dried up. She wasn't nursing Butters anymore. Butters is he's a year old now, so at the time he was about 10 months old. She was pregnant, and there was no lush pasture supporting her lactation. And so the vet gave us the green light to stop milking her, even the weird mastitic quarter, because at this point we had gotten the worst of it out, and it was now liquid. But just when we did the mastitis tests, it was rated as subclinical somatic cell count, which means that there was some sort of bacterial activity or some sort of unusual activity in the milk, but not to like a dangerous level anymore. So now Cookie is dried up, meaning she doesn't have any milk right now, and nothing is nursing on her, we hope. Every now and then I see Butters trying, have a little snack, but she's got horns and we'll have none of it. We're working on getting her body condition in tip-top shape for when she calves at the end of the year, which means, helping her put on weight again. Dairy cows are very bony in comparison to meat cows because a lot of their metabolic activity is geared towards producing milk. And so they do have kind of the hips that stick out and you can see their ribs a little bit. So when she's not in milk, we really want to make sure that she gains that extra weight and makes sure her musculature is in the best condition for her so that she'll be really healthy for when her calf is born and when she'll go back into a lactation cycle again. It's kind of funny to realize how much I miss the milking and the routine of it and the dairy processing and all of that stuff, because suddenly, I do get to sleep in a little bit in the mornings if I wanted to, but I really miss the routine of getting the milk and being with the cow and bringing it in and straining it and, having the cheese making day and all that kind of stuff. The first time buying store-bought milk after a year of being able to swim in milk if I wanted to was a really kind of crushing, soul-eating experience. And there's such a difference. I feel so spoiled, but there's a big difference in the taste of store-bought milk versus regular milk, and the butter and the yogurt and all that stuff is just completely different experiences. And even my kids mention we miss Cookie's milk. I can't wait till she has a baby again and we can have her milk again too. We have been able to get a little bit of milk from helping our neighbors with their milk cow. who happens to be Cookie's sister, Roxy. But it's not the same, obviously, because it's not your cow. And I'm definitely counting down the days where we can have that routine back in our schedule and that sort of abundance in our lives again. That's my story for today. It was a little rambly and I apologize. But I hope it was interesting for you. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to visit our website. It's silvergoosefamilyfarm.com for any additional information about our farm. You can also follow us on Instagram, the same handle, Silver Goose Family Farm. Please feel free to email us or send us a line through the website, comment, question about anything. We really appreciate any feedback and just the fact that you took the time to spend it with us. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I'll share another one with you soon next time. Bye.